Good morning. We're going to talk about why God chooses the black sheep and the power of being the black sheep/scapegoat. I'll start with a question. Have you ever felt like the odd one out, maybe? Like you were born into maybe a family, a community, of whatever circumstances, maybe even the world that does not understand or facilitate the best things in you. Maybe you were labeled as too much, too hyper, too different, or just plain not enough for the circumstances you were in. The one that society calls the black sheep often feel like their very existence is a burden, a mistake. But what if I told you that the very thing that makes you different is the thing that God says you are chosen for? You see, the world loves to elevate the predictable, the polished, and the palatable, but God has a habit of picking the overlooked, the underestimated, and the misunderstood to accomplish his greatest works. In the Bible, these people are often the black sheep of their families as well, the ones who didn't fit in. Why is that? It's because through the black sheep, God showcases his glory, his power, and his ability to redeem even the most fractured of circumstances. So I'd like to share with you a little bit about the black sheep that talks about in Scripture. Think about David for a moment. The young shepherd boy, the youngest of his brothers, forgotten in the fields when Samuel comes to anoint the next king of Israel. Now, Jesse, David's own father, did not even consider him worth mentioning, but God did. And God tells Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things that people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." So God saw what no one else could see in David. His own family saw a shepherd, but God saw a king. And this just goes to show you that God can pick the people that are not even considered by their own family. Or you take Joseph, the dreamer. He was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned. Yet every time that life tried to bury Joseph, Joseph rose higher. Why was that? That's because God was with him. In Genesis 50:20, it tells us what Joseph said to his brothers after all was said and done. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." See how God used Joseph, and through all that, Joseph's pain was not wasted. It was a preparation, and the same is true of yours. None of it is in vain. Why does God choose the black sheep? Well, first of all, the black sheep is going to be more moldable. When life has rejected you, when people have cast you aside and placed you as a burden, it sort of gives you a humble nature. And that humility is the soil that God grows greatness. The black sheep have already been stripped of all their pride because they were not given the luxury of being comfortable. So God can work with somebody who has been broken because their heart is still soft enough to listen and to obey and change and create the great works that God does through them. Think about Moses. Moses was a murderer, a fugitive, a stuttering man who did not feel qualified to speak for God. And yet, God chooses Moses to lead the entire nation out of slavery in Egypt. Moses did not look the part, but God does not care about appearances. He cares about availability to do his works, not perfection. The black sheep understands pain. When you've walked through that fire and you've come out, you have compassion, you have what you've been weathered, you know what it feels like to be overlooked, undervalued, and underestimated, and you also have that grit to get through it, because that pain gives you the heart to make it through it, and also the heart for others who are also suffering. That Jesus was the ultimate scapegoat. Isaiah 53:3 calls Jesus a man of suffering, familiar with pain. Jesus knows what it feels like to be rejected and mocked and misunderstood, but it was through that pain that he brought salvation to the world. God working through his son, Jesus, who died on the cross. And your pain has a purpose as well. It's not random. It's refining you. It's shaping you into someone who can carry the weight of your calling. And that's the bottom line of it. Number 3, the black sheep is set apart. To be chosen often means to be set apart. And being set apart can feel like isolation. But that's where God does his best work. Think about all the times that God took his chosen ones into the wilderness. You got Moses, David, Elijah, Jesus, and many more. The wilderness is where God trains his warriors for the garden. When you're the black sheep, you learn to rely on God in ways that others do not. You don't have time. You don't have the luxury of blending in or coasting through or getting by with the crowd just to get through. The separation prepares you to actually be a leader, to stand out and to accomplish the extraordinary, though it can feel excruciating while going through it. Number 4, the black sheep knows that they need God, and that's the truth. God often chooses the least likely candidates because they know that they can't do it alone. This allows for God's glory to shine, and when you're the black sheep, you don't have the luxury of leaning on privileged connections or status. You've been forced to lean on God, and that dependence is exactly what equips you for the greatness that you will step into so long as you continue the path. Paul talks about this in 2 Corinthians 12:9 when he says, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness." Now, your weakness is not a disqualification. It's actually a secret weapon because this allows for God to work through you. Now, the journey of the scapegoat black sheep, let's talk about that for a second. That process, it's real. The black sheep is not glamorous. It's painful. It's chaotic. It's catastrophic. It's all those things, but it's also sacred. Rejection prepares you. The rejection that you face is not the end, it's the beginning. Rejection is often the way of God redirecting you. When people push you away, it forces you to draw closer to your faith, closer to God. Joseph's brothers rejected him, but that rejection was actually the first step in a journey that led him to the Pharaoh's palace. Sometimes the pit is the first step on the path. Isolation shapes you. Seasons of loneliness are not punishment, they are preparation. When God isolates you, He's drawing you into a deeper relationship and with Him with faith. And He's giving you space to discover who you really are and who He's called you to be. David's time in the fields were not wasted. That's where he learned to worship and to fight and to trust God and to have faith. And it's often in the hidden places where no one else is, where God shapes the greatest leaders. Elevation is coming, because here's the thing about black sheep. God does not leave you in the pit, the fields, or the wilderness. When the time is right, He elevates you. But He doesn't elevate you for your glory. He does it for the kingdoms in His glory. Psalms 75, 6 and 7 reminds us that no one from the east or the west or from the desert can exalt themselves. It is God who judges. He brings one down. He exalts another. When God elevates you, nobody else can take the credit. Not somebody in your family that kicked you to the curb, not your friends, not even you. It's God. And when you're walking in your calling, that's what it is. So what do you do when you realize that you are the black sheep and that God has chosen you for something great? First of all, you've got to embrace these differences. Stop trying to fit in places where God has called you to stand out. Your uniqueness is your superpower given by God. The very things that people seem peculiar about you, criticized you about, these are the things that God uses to change the world. Number 2, stay close to God. Being chosen does not mean life gets easier. In fact, it often gets harder. But the key is you have to stay connected to the one who called you. Whether that be through prayer, worship, the word, you got to keep your eyes focused on what's right, on God, not your circumstances. Number 3, use your pain to fuel your purpose. Your scars are your testimony. Do not hide that. Use that. Share your story to yourself. Let that fuel carry you. Let others see what God can do to someone who the world tried to discard. And number 4, be ready to lead. God did not call you to blend in. He called you to be a leader, whether that's a leader in your family, your community, or the zeitgeist of your generation. You've got to step into the role that God has prepared for you, because that is what He has called and chosen you for. From the black sheep to the chosen one. And I'm going to leave you with this. If you've ever felt like you're the black sheep, the scapegoat, the one who just nobody wants, rejected, doesn't belong, know this. You're in good company, because God has a massive track record of using the least likely candidates to accomplish His greatest works. Your rejection, their rejection of you is not your identity. Your pain is not your end. You are not a mistake. You are chosen. And when God chooses you, there's no amount of opposition in this world that can stop God's plan. Romans 8:31 says, if God is for us, who can be against us? So, step into your calling, embrace your difference, walk boldly in the knowledge that you were not overlooked, you are set apart. And when the world sees that, and the world sees what God can do with somebody that the world wanted to reject and cast aside and say that they were too much or not enough, His name will be glorified, and your life will be a testament to the power of God. Because in God's kingdom, black sheep becomes the chosen one. Never forget that. Hope everybody has a good day. Make sure you smash that like button, get a conversation started in the comments, and share this video with anybody who you think could benefit from its message. God bless.